Hi everyone. I've always had a bit of a dichotomous personality. That is, I've sort of always had this kind of a savior complex. That might be overstating it a bit, but definitely a sense of fairness, I think, and champion the underdog. And when I see injustice, I feel compelled to do something about it. If I see people who are mistaken, the error of their ways, I want to just see what I can do to correct it and that sort of thing. I also, though, reach a point where I can't take it anymore, and I sort of feel like, all right, you idiots, destroy yourselves. You deserve what you get. Now, before you criticize me or condemn me too harshly for that, I think I can make a case as to why that possibly is, given my history. I still don't feel like I identify as, I don't feel like I fit in with society, and I do feel a lot like a lone wolf in that regard. I've made videos on my YouTube channel years ago where I talked about the dangers of ideological cold wars becoming ideological hot wars. And I was basing that on the rhetoric that I was seeing at the time, the harshness with which people treated each other, the divisiveness, the early stages of my Twitter awakening, I should say, and the cesspool that is. I mean, just the horrific ways that people will treat each other, and the ways that people will dismiss someone so readily based on a couple of key disagreements without really knowing anything else about that person, without attempting to show them the error of their ways, attempting to help in some ways if the other person is in error. They really just want to dismiss them and relegate them to the scrap heap of humanity. And of course, I think we're seeing the early stages of that now. Then perhaps the early stages of cancel culture. Now we're fully involved in cancel culture, and now we've moved on to the riots and the destruction and the further devastation. And I don't think that's helpful, and I still would warn that ideological hot wars are not a good idea. We're supposed to be beyond that. We're supposed to be using our words and exposing bad ideas to the sunlight, to sunlight, and hopefully may the best ideas win. The other thing that I warned about in years past, and you can go back through my YouTube catalog, you can find some of these videos, I warned about the dangers of people who promote revolution. And I see the people who promote the idea of revolution as callous, power-seeking, heartless people, because if you know anything about revolution, generally speaking, there are a lot of innocents who have their blood spilled in a revolution. And I don't think it's a compassionate position to take to be for some kind of revolution. I heard a guy the other day on the internet, he was being interviewed, and he said something about the defund the police platform, and he was saying, just get rid of it and let's just see what happens. Well, easy for you to say, right? Just get rid of the police and then let's just see what happens. Well, in some ways, obviously we don't need to see what happens. We kind of know what happens when the police are abolished. And if you want to reimagine the police, I suppose you're welcome to do that, but we're going to leave things as is until you've reimagined something that makes sense to the majority of the rest of us. And that's the other point that I want to make about revolution is the people who are out there promoting this idea of destabilizing and demolishing the system, the structures, and all of that, and having a revolution. It's not as though they represent like fully 80% of the populace or something like that, and that they're just the revolutionaries who are willing to take on the cause for the rest of us. It is the rest of us that they seek to destabilize, to demolish, to destroy. And so in that way, of course, this is not really a revolution. This is a coup. It's not as though the rest of us want to defund the police. If you look at the polls, and especially if you're going to talk about police brutality against minorities, perhaps we should ask the minorities what they think about having the police in their communities, and they respond in polls overwhelmingly in favor of having the same or more police. That's not to say, of course, that police brutality and racism within the ranks isn't something that needs to be addressed, but that's not something that I think results in a call for complete demolition of the entity itself. And let's not forget, the calls for disarming people, let's say First Amendment or Second Amendment critics, and also the calls for defunding the police and getting rid of the police force, those are not calls for having no weapons, and those are not calls for having no police. They just want a different police than you do. They're not talking about abolishing power. They're talking about attaining the power themselves. And I think that's a key thing to remember. You could see that actually in a small form when Chaz or Chop started in Seattle, and you had people taking control, and they were very happy to tell people what they can and cannot do, and that these things will be enforced. So it's not that they didn't want police, they just wanted to be police in that scenario. And so I don't think it's overstating it to say that we, say the 87%, the other 87%, or whatever you'd like to call us, we are the systems that they would like to destabilize. Now, when it comes to BLM and Antifa and groups like that, I think it's also important to acknowledge or to recognize that there's sort of two distinct camps when it comes to that. There's the control structures, the people in charge, let's say, and the useful idiots. These are the troops on the ground, the white liberals often that are the foot soldiers for the movement. The cloaking device of the people in charge is this compassion, is this sense of fairness, is anti-racism. Those are their cloaking device. This is what they hide behind. And that's why BLM is such a dangerous movement, because they've actually hijacked a phrase that people would otherwise agree with, and they utilize it as if it were their slogan, the very name of the organization. I always remember Don Lemon, he talked about Antifa. He said, this group is anti-fascist. It's in the name. Okay, Don Lemon. The name doesn't mean anything, right? The name can be just as much a distraction or actually a lie, if you will, as it could be a statement of, truth. I suppose another way of putting it would be to say, by their fruits ye shall know them. Right, Mr. Lemon? The other thing is, of course, the irony of all of this is that in a world where institutions and structures and vestiges of whiteness and white supremacy and all those things were as bad as they're made out to be by these groups, I don't think they would have the gall to have a violent insurrection and rioting and burning things down and tearing down all of the outward indicators of that system, right? If it were as bad as they claim it was, then you would actually see vigilantism, but I don't think it would be very thinly veiled. I don't think that these brave white foot soldiers would have any problem putting down that insurrection. The fact that they're able to continue with this, the fact that something like Chaz or Chop is allowed to exist, and these riots are allowed to go on and have this momentum built is proof that these things are not the way that they claim that they are. And I'm not sure that they believe it anyway. Again, these are avowed Marxists. These are people who see an opportunity to instigate class strife, to get people fighting with each other so that they can wrest power, the reins of power, from the ashes after the fact. And, it's the same thing with these anti-bias training or implicit bias training, and anti-racism training and deconstructing your whiteness training that goes on at lots of different companies now, and in particular in government agencies. In a world where those things were actually an issue, I don't think you could have that training. In other words, were that training really needed, I don't think you would be having it or you could be having it. And so, again, this is all part of this. You need to demoralize a group and enrage another group. And then, you're hoping that there are some instigators in all the different camps that are going to start lobbing bombs and that sort of thing. I mean that metaphorically and possibly literally. Again, I warn against turning your ideological Cold Wars into ideological hot wars. If you claim to be for justice, if you claim to be for compassion and love and caring and all of those things, fairness, then you would avoid those things at all costs, because it is going to be the innocent who are going to pay the biggest price. Mark my words on that. It's been that way through all of human history. Now, one other thing that gets employed at some point, and we see this happening now, is people are being forced or asked to make some sort of a declaration. And this is sort of a purity test, if you will. And of course, it doesn't always work that way. I just watched a video today from Black Pigeon Speaks, Felix Rex now, where he was talking about woke fishing, which I guess is happening, that goes back a long way. We just didn't have a term like that for it. And, this is going to go along with the same thing. When someone comes to you and says, are you an anti-racist? And they're expecting you to confirm that, right? And, the irony there, I think, in some ways is if you're a thinking person and you are an anti-racist, the question itself is an affront. And so you don't really feel like responding in the affirmative, even though it is true, because I think deep down you feel like, no, just like saying our motto is Black Lives Matter, or we are Antifa, anti-fascists, saying I'm an anti-racist doesn't mean anything. I can just say it. I could be woke fishing you. Anti-racism is behavior, not just a statement, right? And again, by their fruits ye shall know them. And so, but this is all about part of the demoralization, I think, too, in particular of the woke white liberal class. We see this where actually they're asked to get down on their knees in front of a minority to affirm their, and to apologize for their whiteness, et cetera, et cetera. I was thinking too about, Oprah, who I don't view very highly. She's made some really terrible comments about atheists in the past, and she's got some weird views on religion and things like that as well, spirituality. But she's really outdone herself with this statement that, it doesn't matter how poor you are or how wealthy you are, if you're a white person, you still have your whiteness. And this goes back to my statement earlier that I do have this sense at some point, like, to hell with you all then, let the world burn, you deserve what you get, you buggers can't figure out your own shit, as though I'm not part of the hive, right? And part of that is because I really don't feel like I fit in still with humanity. I do still feel like a lone wolf. And where that comes from is when I came into the school system that I spent most of my years in, it was partway through grade 2, and we lived up in the bush. My parents had just moved us to a very, very rural location, no running water, all that kind of stuff. No electricity, an outhouse, a root cellar, all of that stuff. I'm just going to take off my latex gloves. My hair, would stand up on end. I had very thick, wiry hair, and I was dirty clothes, and, the clothes that we did have, we would get at the Salvation Army or thrift store. And I got labeled immediately. I was an outcast immediately, and I was the school outcast for most of my school experience, from that partway through grade 2 right until high school graduation. Now, by the time I was a high school grad, I was a little more accepted. A lot of the stigma had left. However, it was still there. You could still feel it. And I was just immediately labeled as that dirty little kid from the bush, basically. And it always stuck. And I was the outcast of the school. They had a few different nicknames for me, one of which was the bush nigger. And I don't have any problem not censoring my use of that word because it was fucking used against me. I was the bush nigger. And there was another word they called me, which was a contraction of my last name, so I'm not going to use it, but it was equally derogatory. They were used together. So-and-so the bush nigger. And I'm just wondering where my whiteness was to save me from that. Now, keep in mind, we didn't have a lot of minorities in our school, but there were some Native Canadian peers that we had in our school. Back then we called them Indians. I don't know, that's obviously not politically correct anymore, but that was the parlance of the day. And they were not teased for their heritage or for the color of their skin or anything like that to the degree that I was teased for being who I was. I was singled out from day one in that school system. Now, I'm not saying that our Native Canadian peers didn't have any discrimination or anything like that. I'm not making that claim. But certainly in our school scenario, I did not witness them receiving the kind of ridicule and rejection that I did. And in fact, I got it from some of them as well. And I'm just wondering again where my whiteness was to save me from all of that. And that is where from this still sense of disconnection I have to this day comes from, right? That's the origins of it, is never really feeling that I fit in with school. Now, and if you saw me as a young adult out of high school, you probably wouldn't recognize me. I wouldn't be making a YouTube video. I probably could not run a business where I deal with the public all the time. Obviously, I've changed. And a lot of things happened in my early adulthood, in my professional career that really helped me come out of my skin and start to realize my own value. And I reached a point where I stopped caring about what other people thought of me or what I did. I just reached a point where I thought, well, fuck it. If I want to live a life that's fulfilling to me, I'm just going to have to do what I do. And to hell with what other people think. It is what it is. I mean, it's not like I could get rejected anymore, probably. And the net result of that was I actually became popular as a result of that. I think people are interested in autonomous, self-directed, self-motivated people in some ways, and I think that actually attracted people to me in a way that I would never have expected. I think before that point, I would have always been a little bit of a, not a leech, but I would be a hanger-on, and I experienced several big-time rejections in high school from people that I thought were friends, and I think they reached a point where they realized that A, it wasn't going to be very good for them socially to be hanging out with the outcast, and B, I was just a little bit too needy and a little bit too clingy for their liking. And so these were pretty monumental rejections, and they were somewhat vicious that I experienced in those times. And, you know, I've never had anything like that in my adult life because, again, I think I've moved on to a point where I don't really care about that sort of thing. So yeah, you know, I see everything that's going on in the world, and I open up my iPad after a hard day's work. Of course, I listen to different YouTube videos while I'm working during the day, and I see all the things happening, and I feel that twinge within me to do something about it. And then I'll reach a saturation point where I just go, out of hell with it. You people, you're going to wreck it all. You're going to ruin everything. You're going to ruin the Enlightenment. You're going to ruin individual liberties and freedoms. You're going to ruin this great experiment that is, you know, Republican democracy or whatever you want to call it. And even though I think it's actually immoral, I will acknowledge that it's the best thing that we've actually ever tried. I probably should leave it there. As always, let me know what you think. I do enjoy the conversation. And this is just sort of a few of my thoughts and maybe a little bit of a window into why I feel compelled to speak on certain topics. And I really do feel like we're headed for a very dangerous ideological hot war right now with some people with far deeper vested interests than maybe we even really know as the instigators, and possibly some people in the global elite that are looking upon this as an opportunity to clamp down on the citizenry in general. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.